Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis chapter 10, Halacha 1. If you're following along in the art scroll, it's 82a1. We're going to finish up really with the last sugya that finishes up from part 2 of the shiur. This is going to be part 3 of the shiur. That they're not reliant on the witnesses. The idea of the witnesses is to help, but they have an algorithm, and they're going to set the calendar according to the algorithm, whether the witnesses show up or not, or either whether the witnesses are truthful or not. And this is going to be a calendar that's revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu and has been handed down since. And one of the ideas that's so important about getting the calendar right is because you have to know which day is which, because when is the Sheviis year going to start and when is the Sheviis year going to end, and this is related to when debt payments are going to be erased. So the last ruling about the sanctification of the month comes like this. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha cites Rabbi Imi, who says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi, that if they sanctified the month and afterwards the witnesses were found to be zomin, these are going to be, by the way, fake witnesses, and sometimes the Seducer would try to send fake witnesses to change the calculation to fit. The Seducer had some different ideas on which days had to fall for certain holidays, on which day of the week, and they wanted to try to adjust it, and they would send fake witnesses. So if they sanctified the month and afterwards the witnesses were found to be zomin, then the month is sanctified nonetheless. Okay, so what does that mean, that it's sanctified nonetheless? Well, again, they're not basing it on the witnesses. They're basing it on the algorithm that's been handed down since Moshe Rabbeinu. So if you had fake witnesses coming and testifying, it doesn't mean that that's going to be the cause and the influence of how the calendar's set. The Sanhedrin is just going to set the calendar anyway, and it might be that it was the fake witnessing was in accordance with the algorithm, or it might not be in accordance with the algorithm. In other words, that the setting of the calendar is going to happen anyway, and it's based on the algorithm, not based on the witnesses, even though we want witnesses to come. Now, the Gemara is going to try to trace the source of this ruling. Rabbi Yosa met Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi, and Rabbi Yosa said to him, "Did you hear the matter?" This is going to be the ruling that Rosh Chodesh becomes sanctified in such a case from your father. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Pazi replied, yes. In other words, even if faked witnesses come, that it's still going to be sanctified. Why? Based on the algorithm. It's not determined by the witnesses. The Gemara is going to conclude the reason. Rabbi Abba says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we are not meticulous with regards to the witnesses of the month. So Rabbi Kanievsky says about this that the witnesses of the new moon are not examined extensively, and the Rambam in Hilchos Kiddush HaKodesh in 2.2, for the sanctification of the month, it's dependent on the decision of the court, regardless of the actual sighting of the moon. And this is based on a verse in Vayikra 23.2 that says, you shall declare them, and the word them, otam, is spelt defectively without the vav. It should have a vav in there, and by taking out this vav, the Rambam explains that it's conveying that the festivals that you declare are legitimate even if you were misled with regards to the sighting of the moon. And so again, the Sanhedrin is going to be basing it upon the algorithm, not based on the witnesses. Now, that's going to get into what's going on with the next part of our Mishnah and why it's so important. And the Mishnah that we were talking about says that if it happened that the month of Elul was full, so that the first day of Rosh Chodesh was actually going to be the last day of Sheviis, the obligation is canceled. And if not, it's not canceled. So in this ruling of the Mishnah, it's talking about how Sheviis is going to cancel debts owed to the person, in this case, who is a butcher who sells the meat on Rosh Hashanah on credit. And the question is, if it's really Rosh Hashanah, there's no problem. But if it's actually going to be where it's not Rosh Hashanah yet, it's actually the day before, then it is going to be canceled. And that's what we're going to be getting into. Now, part of the question is going to be coming and saying, well, what about store credit? And is store credit going to be like a loan? And in the case of the butcher, is that going to be like store credit? And so the Gemara is going to get into this difference between somebody who takes out store credit for inventory and someone who is a store owner who maybe is a butcher and he sells meat and he does it on credit. And so in the case of it being a day before Rosh Hashanah, then what's going to be the case? Well, in the case of the store credit, it's not actually a loan. It's an inventory loan. It's not actually a loan, so it's not going to be wiped out. But in the case of the butcher's meat, that's going to be wiped out. That's going to be a loan. So the Gemara is going to explain it. Rabbi Lazar says that the ruling regarding the meat distributed on Rosh Hashanah, is following the view of Rabbi Yehuda and refers to where the seller subsequently sold something else to those people on that day. And just as Rabbi Yehuda holds in the case of store credit that each subsequent purchase on credit transforms the previous obligation into a loan, so too here the original debt for the purchase of the meat is transformed into the loan. So the Gemara wants to question this and dig into this ruling a little bit more. And the Gemara says, but is it fit for the seller of the meat to demand payment from the buyer on Rosh Hashanah? Certainly not. In other words, if it's Rosh Hashanah, you're not allowed to press for repayment of a loan on a holiday. And why is that? Well, you can't demand payment on Sheviis, and then the prohibition for Sheviis against demanding payment is not going to apply on Rosh Hashanah, and because it's not actually Sheviis anymore. Now, Rosh Hashanah is the start of the new year. Now, we know that we have a demand. You're not allowed to demand payment on Sheviis. Fine, but it's not Sheviis. Now you're demanding payment on Rosh Hashanah. And wouldn't it be where now on Rosh Hashanah, what's going to be the status? If you issue this debt on Rosh Hashanah, is it still going to tie over to Sheviis in some way where it could cancel the debt? The Gemara is going to answer this. Rabbi Ba says in the name of Rabbi Zera, since the buyer is fit for the seller for trust, it is considered as if it is fit for the seller to demand payment for him. Therefore, even on Yom Tov, the debt is subject to the Sheviis prohibition not to press for payment. And because you can't press for payment, it's possible for Sheviis to cancel a debt. That's a surprising Hiddush, and that's going to be something that we might not have expected. Marafulda explains it like this. He's saying the fact that the seller gave him the meat on credit indicates that he trusts him. And although the debt cannot actually be collected on a Yom Tov, because you can't go press for repayment of the debt on a Yom Tov. And nonetheless, he gives it to him on trust. And the fact that he trusts him enables us to view this obligation as a collectible debt regarding which the creditor can demand payment, and a person does not normally trust his fellow unless he can demand payment from him. And then it would still be subject to the prohibition of he shall not press for payment. Now, the question is that Yerushalmi might mean that since the first day observed as Rosh Hashanah is in reality a weekday, because we have a thing with Rosh Hashanah where it's really going to be celebrated as 2 days. So I think what this is saying, well, wait a second. If it's a 2-day holiday, they might be saying, wait a second, the real day for the calculation might be the second day, might not be the first day. So perhaps the first day of Rosh Hashanah is really still Sheviis. And so if you issued, and it's a suffix, we don't know which is which. So if you have a case where on the first day he comes and he borrows money or he goes and he borrows meat, and it's based on trust, and he's going to have enough food now for the first Rosh Hashanah and the second Rosh Hashanah. Effectively, they're saying that, well, maybe the first day really was just Sheviis, and now you've created this debt on Sheviis, which might be Rosh Hashanah, but it might not. It might be the second day. And so, one of the days has to not be. And so maybe the debt is wiped out. And the idea is that since it's fit for the seller to demand payment for the buyer, it is considered as if it is fit for the buyer to give the seller payment. So the idea here is that when the seller provides him with additional merchandise, or he gives them merchandise that it gets transformed into a loan, the obligation for meat is going to be subject to cancellation by Sheviis, because again, it might actually be the different day, and it might be the day, but again, it's a thing of Suffolk. And we know that the debt being wiped out in Sheviis is a thing that's doraita. Now, in a case of something that's going to be Suffolk on which day it is, because which day it is set by the rabbis, and which day it is going to be the Rabbanan. But in the case of something doraita, that's going to override something that's Rabbanan. So I think what this is trying to get at is, because wiping out the debt is going to be a doraita obligation in the Torah, and you're not sure which day Rosh Hashanah is, whether it's the first day or the second day, it's going to be I think what this is saying is it's saying that we're going to rule stringently that if you were to borrow the money on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, that it would be wiped out because of the suffix that comes about on whether it's going to be the first day or the second day. I think that's what we're getting at. Now, we're going to talk about another ruling regarding the cancellation of loans that's talked about in the Mishnah. Rabbi Ba Bar Marmel quotes Rabbi Amram and Rav Masna in the name of Rav, and says that if one lends his fellow money on condition not to demand payment for him, Sheviis nonetheless cancels it. So this is going to be, says the Maro Fulda, where the creditor agrees not to demand payment for the debt. Nonetheless, it's still going to be subject to Sheviis, and it's still part of the Sheviis obligation is he may not press for payment. So for the borrower to absolve one part of the obligation in Sheviis collections, which is, okay, I'm not going to go collect. Basically, they're saying that the borrower is not absolved of the obligation to repay the loan, and but if it comes to be on Sheviis, nonetheless, it's still gonna cancel it out. So if you're waiving part of the obligation, nonetheless, it doesn't change the status of the Sheviis loan to where it wouldn't get wiped out. I think what they're trying to say is, they say, wait a second, a Sheviis loan is going to be where it's wiped out, and also I can't press for payment. And if I can't press for payment, well, I can understand that okay, it might be wiped out because this is the condition for the whole thing. Fine. I think what the Mishnah is saying is, they're saying, wait a second, if I tamper with and change it so that now it's not covering all the parts of the Sheviis loan included in that, not to press for payment, is it going to be where the status of this loan has somehow changed so that maybe Sheviis won't cancel it? And they're saying, no, Sheviis is still going to cancel it. The Gemara is going to support this ruling, and it says that we learned in our Mishnah a similar ruling. If one slaughters a cow and distributes it on Rosh Hashanah, the debt becomes canceled if it turned out that day was in reality Erev Rosh Hashanah. And before explaining how this supports Rav's ruling, the Gemara now is going to talk about the resolution to the contradiction between the ruling of the Mishnah's earlier ruling and also with regards to store credit. So one of the ideas is that, one could argue that nothing can be learned from this Mishnah because the Mishnah looks to be contradicting itself. But that's actually not true. We're going to unravel that. So Rabbi Lazar says it is following the view of Rabbi Yehuda, and the Gemara proceeds to explain how our Mishnah supports Rav's ruling, and says, but is it fit for one who distributed the meat to demand payment from the purchaser on Rosh Hashanah? Certainly not. In the case of the Mishnah, is comparable to one who lends with the stipulation that he will not demand payment. Yet the Mishnah is ruling that Sheviis cancels the debt, and this Mishnah would support Rav's ruling. So the Gemara now is going to refute the proof by giving an explanation of what the Mishnah is saying. It says that there is no proof because the Mishnah is understood like that which Rabbi Ba says in the name of Rabbi Zera. And that's going to be that since the buyer is fit for the seller to trust, it is considered as if it is fit for the seller to demand payment for him. And since it is fit for the seller to demand payment from the buyer, it is considered as if it is fit for the buyer to give the seller payment for the first purchase when he is extending credit for a new purchase. So in the case of the Mishnah, Sheviis is going to cancel the debt because there's no explicit stipulation that's made by the creditor that he would not demand payment. But it is possible that if the lender explicitly agreed not to demand payment, the Sheviis cancellation would not apply. Now, why is this even coming up? And we see, okay, a loan is going to be subject to the prohibition against pressing for payment of a loan after Sheviis. And what's going on here? Well, look at it like this. We have the Prozbul that was instituted, and the Prozbul is effectively a document that's taking the whole loan and it's changing it, right? So we know that in the Torah it's saying that, okay, we have a document that's going to say, okay, I owe X and Y money, and now the Sheviis comes and I wipe it out. And by the way, also included in that from the Torah is I'm not going to demand payment. I'm not going to press for payment. So in the Prozbul, what's happening is the Prozbul is coming along and adjusting one part of it. It's coming and saying, no, in your document, you're both agreeing that this loan does not get wiped out and discarded by the coming of Sheviis. This is coming and taking the opposite. This is coming and saying, okay, if I've come and I made a different agreement that I'm not going to press for payment, is that also going to be enough where it's going to change the status of the loan so that perhaps it won't be wiped out in Sheviis? And because again, the Prozbul is doing the opposite thing. The Prozbul is taking one part that and saying, okay, we've made an arrangement that the note won't be erased, that this will continue after Sheviis. They're coming along and they're saying, no, we're gonna come and we're gonna make an explicit stipulation that we're not gonna demand payment. And so you'd say, well, maybe this is an adjustment that kind of does change the Doraita status of what a Sheviis loan is. Maybe this is not going to be the same kind of loan that the Torah is talking about, because you've adjusted it and you've changed the status of it. In other words, part of the status is you're not supposed to press for payment, and now you've taken that away. You didn't take away the other part. And so implicit in there, you could say, well, if I'm not pressing for payment, it's but it's basically going to be because the rest of the loan is not really going to be wiped out. It's going to be left there, and I'm just being nice and not pressing for payment, but the loan is still there. Rav is saying no, that if you're going to make an adjustment, you have to make an adjustment on the other side. You have to come and make an agreement that's going to say that no, the actual document is going to explicitly say that the payment is not wiped out and that the Sheviis cancellation is not going to apply to the loan. It's not enough to just say about the other aspect of this Doraita obligation not to press for payment, that you're taking that away. In other words, you're saying if you're taking this away, isn't it really like implied that your loan, you've effectively made a loan that's going to survive Sheviis? And Rav is saying, no, you didn't. You actually have to go and actually write down the relevant part, which is that the loan is going to survive Sheviis cancellation, and that you're adjusting other parts of the Doraita obligations in the Torah about a Sheviis loan is not enough that it indicates that it's that kind of loan. You actually have to write it down. The Gemara now is going to conclude with a passage that's quoted above and says, so to here, in the case where the storekeeper extends credit a second time to the same purchaser on an ordinary weekday, since it was fit for the buyer to give money for his earlier purchase and he did not give it, the obligation for the first purchase becomes a loan. So this is a case where store owner takes out credit from a lender, and it's to buy merchandise. Fine. Now, the Gemara is coming along and saying, look, you're supposed to demand, payment if you're the lender. And now the fact that you've come and you've given him a new inventory loan, and you didn't demand payment for the first one, effectively means that you've turned the first one, even if you didn't mention it, into just a regular loan. And that inventory loan is going to get wiped out. Why? Because you didn't press for payment. And you didn't just say, look, I'm not giving you more inventory loans. Pay off your first one. And the fact that you're creating this stipulation where you're giving him now another line of credit to buy more inventory, rather than pressing for payment, you've effectively turned the first one into a loan. The second one now will be an inventory loan. And so the first one will be subject to being wiped out in Sheviis. The Gemara now is going to cite where a creditor stipulation is able to prevent the cancellation of a loan. By the way, we're talking about the cancellation of a loan and also not cancellation of a loan, where you're going to prevent cancellation of a loan, because that's going to be what the Prozbul is going to be. So Rabbi Yossi, son of Rabbi Bun, says in the name of Rav, if one lends his fellow on condition that Sheviis should not cancel a loan, Sheviis does not cancel. In other words, you have to make a stipulation contrary for it to take effect. Okay, so normally in Torah law, if you make a stipulation contrary to Torah law, it's not like you say anything. But with regards to monetary matters, where somebody does have the right to relinquish his property on a monetary basis, he can agree to waive his rights and protections in the Torah. And so that's going to be the basis for the Prozbul. So if one is lending to his fellow on condition that Sheviis will not cancel the loan, Sheviis is not going to cancel the loan. But if he's going to make a specific stipulation on this monetary issue and make a waiver, then it is going to be where it's not going to cancel that loan. Normally, it would cancel a loan because that's a right that's accorded to you. Monetary laws are going to be a little bit different. So normally, if you're going to go and make a stipulation about something Doraita that is not related to monetary, and it violates what the Torah says, then you didn't say anything. It's like you didn't say anything at all. But nonetheless, on monetary things with property, you're allowed to waive property rights. And that's what it's talking about. That's going to be the basis for coming up with a Prozbul. Now, the Gemara is going to support this ruling from a Mishnah regarding a case where the borrower maintains that the terms of the loan allowed for the debt can get repaid at the conclusion of, say, 10 years. So if the lender produces witnesses who testify that the loan was only for 30 days, but are subsequently found to be liars, okay, fake witnesses that are liars, zomim. So the case here is going to be what happens if, and the case that's going to be coming up is what happens if you have a case where you have in the Sheviis year, you have somebody who borrowed money before Sheviis, and now during Sheviis he's coming along and he says there's no loan. There's no loan. And then after he makes tshuva, after Sheviis, and he comes along and says there's a loan. Now they want to know, wait a second. He had this loan during Sheviis. Now he's admitting to this loan after Sheviis. Does he have to repay it or not? Did Sheviis wipe it out or not? That's going to be the sub-theme of what's happening here. So we learned in a Mishnah that if Zomin witnesses testify that one must repay a debt in 30 days, when in actuality it's been given 10 years to repay, we assess how much a person would have to give in order to do that. So the Gemara is going to say for the difference between having to repay them within 30 days and having to repay them within 10 years. So how much would he have to pay on an average, like if he had a loan of 1,000 zuz available to him, how much would he have to pay is a difference between, say, whether the repayment is going to be 30 days and you have to do it 30 days and you have 1,000 zuz, or you have 1,000 zuz over 10 years. And so the question is, how does a court come and reconcile it? So the Gemara says, now is it possible to have 10 years without Shmita? Of course, you have Shmita that comes along. So Rav's ruling would be that, Sheviis would cancel a loan even when a stipulation is made, when where there could be even false witnesses that where there could be lying about whether the loan either was ever made or what the time of the loan would be. The Gemara is going to try to dig into this. Rabbi Huna says that no proof can be derived from this Mishnah, for Amorim have followed other reasons why Sheviis does not cancel this loan. So again, you're talking about a loan that perhaps normally a loan, if it doesn't have a specified date, is going to be 30 days. Okay, so if you make a loan to somebody and you don't tell them, it's understood just in the halacha, it's going to be 30 days. But let's say you have a time where they really had a 10-year loan, and witnesses came along and said, no, it was already repaid. They already repaid it a long time ago. They're fake witnesses. Now comes along these people later on, and they're going to say, okay, well, I made tshuva and I want to repay the loan, and I really owed this money all along. This 1,000 zuz owed over 10 years. I really did owe it, and I made tshuva and I want to repay it. Well, maybe the loan is canceled because it survived a Sheviis, and it was there during Sheviis, and normally it would have just been wiped out in Sheviis. So is he going to have to pay this 1,000 zuz or not? So Rav Nachman Bar Yaakov and Rav Shishis disagrees. One says that it refers to one who lends on collateral, and the other says it's referring to one who wrote Prozbul on the loan. And in these cases, Sheviis is not going to cancel this loan. So if you have a Prozbul, that's going to block the Sheviis cancellation of a loan. And the Mishnah in Makot that this is coming from could be referring to a case where it's going to indicate that a loan was a 10-year term and that it would not be canceled by Sheviis, because again, that there's a Sheviis that comes within 10 years, and the question would be, well, wait a second, if I'm taking out a 10-year loan and I know that Sheviis comes up somewhere in that 10 years, well, if we both agreed to a 10-year loan, isn't that going to basically be applying that it's kind of like a Prozbul that, this doesn't get wiped out? And, perhaps it's going to survive the Sheviis year because you've agreed to a 10-year loan. And the Gemara now is going to talk about a law regarding loans from the scriptural passage discussing Sheviis cancellation. A brisa came to taught, 30 days he shall not come. This is going to be where it's going to be an obscure statement that gets clarified, and the Gemara is going to explain what this means. It says, what is the meaning of 30 days he shall not come? And the Gemara explains that Shmuel says the brisa addresses the case where someone who lent his fellow without specifying the due date, and is teaching that the lender is not allowed to demand payment until 30 days have passed from the day of the loan. So in the terms of a loan, an unspecified due date is basically just going to be a 30-day period of time. So the Gemara is going to cite a source for this. Rav Yudah went up to study and stated a source. And regarding the cancellation of debts during Sheviis, the verse states the seventh year, the year of relinquishment, draws near. This, by the way, is going to be from Devarim 15:9, and this is basically saying that that you should not refrain from lending poor people money during Sheviis, even though Sheviis years or before Sheviis, even though Sheviis is coming. And the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, "Are not the seventh year and the year of relinquishment one and the same?" And what does the Torah teach by stating the seventh year, the year of relinquishment, draws near? And the verse is teaching that one who is requested to lend money 30 days before the end of Sheviis should not say that since all 30 days he is not permitted to demand payment, and after 30 days the loan would be subject to Sheviis debt cancellation. He will not be able to collect on a debt, and out of concern that he will incur a loss, he will refuse to grant a loan. So, therefore, it is necessary for the Torah to state the seventh year, the year of relinquishment, draws near, and you will look unkindly at your impoverished brother and not give him a loan, and give, you shall give. This is teaching that one should not refrain from granting loans, say 30 days before the end of Sheviis, or even 30 days before Sheviis begins. And we can infer from this verse that an unspecified loan that has a 30-day term, there'd be no reason for the Torah to discuss a case where the loan took place 30 days before the end of Sheviis. So let's say a person takes a loan that's a 30-day loan, and he's taking it out 28 days before the end of Sheviis, or 25 days before the end of Sheviis. Is that going to be wiped out? So Rav Yudah is indicating that the Sheviis is going to cancel a loan made 30 days before the end of Sheviis, despite the fact that the creditor will never be able to demand payment for the loan. So this is a loan that's made, again, before Sheviis ends. So the Gemara says that, did Rabbi Bab Bar Mamel not quote Rabbi Amram and Rav Masa in the name of Rav as follows? It says, if one lends his fellow money on condition not to demand payment from him, Sheviis nonetheless cancels it. And here too, we have a loan that has an unspecified date. That's going to be 30 days. And it's going to be canceled by Sheviis, even though the lender could not demand payment during Sheviis because it is within the first 30 days of the loan. So the Gemara is going to give another explanation of this. There's a brisa in the Academy of Rabbi Ishmael that was explaining the verse a little bit differently, and it says that the seventh year, the year of relinquishment is approaching, and is not the seventh year, the year of relinquishment. So what does the Torah teach by stating the seventh year, the year of relinquishment is approaching? It says so that one should not say all 6 years that the borrower's field was designated before me for collection, or his vineyard was designated for me for collection. In other words, like he's basically saying that he had a certain property that he basically assigned from his portfolio, and that's going to be designated as for collection. And then the Gemara continues, says, and after 6 years it is subject to the cancellation of debts through Sheviis, and he cannot collect it. Because of that, the Torah must state the seventh year, the year of relinquishment, is approaching, teaching that only loans become canceled, not a lien on property. So if somebody borrows against real property with a specific piece of property, not a general piece of property somewhere in his portfolio, but this piece of land located at this location, this is teaching that the real lien on a real piece of property with a specific piece of property does not get canceled by Sheviis. Only debts that are sort of like not assigned to a property, or just like general debts. One of the issues of a storekeeper with a loan against inventories, you could say this is basically a lien on the inventory. It's connected to a real thing. That's different than just a general obligation to repay a loan. So the Gemara is going to analyze this, and it says that about the next part. It's going to talk about the penalties of a violator, a seducer, a defamer, and also it's going to get into what happens if a court issues an order. So in the case of let's say a defamer, a seducer, a violator, the Torah goes and gives an amount of money that is owed for that. It's a penalty, okay? And in a way, you could say it's like a lien, okay? It's like a lien on the person. It's not really like a loan. Or let's say somebody cheated in business and a bet din gave a penalty to a person to repay. That's not really a loan. That's really a different kind of obligation. So the Gemara is going to explain this. Rav Yudah says in the name of Rav, it is following the view of Rabbi Meir, who is the anonymous Tana of the Mishnah. And it says, for Rabbi Meir says in the matter of a Sheviis cancellation, it's going to be dependent upon the debt resulting from a loan, but other forms of debts are not going to be canceled by Sheviis. So not all debt is going to be canceled by Sheviis. Some will not be canceled by Sheviis. So the next section of the Mishnah says that any court decree is not going to be canceled by Sheviis. And what are these? These are going to be, says the Gemara, these are written court orders. In other words, that the obligation recorded in a court is not going to be canceled by Sheviis because they are considered collateral. It's like really like a lien on the person. And the Torah also gives where, a defamer or a violator or seducer effectively has a lien on the person himself. It's not really the same as like a debt. That's what the Torah law is trying to argue. And the Gemara is going to elaborate on Sheviis cancellation of contested loans. This is going to be also kind of like what happens with your 10-year loan, and you have these fake witnesses, and now you have a contested debt, and now the Sheviis has come, and now they want to see, okay, did this loan survive or not? And normally a loan would be wiped out during Sheviis, but the question is, what happens if they lied about it, and then afterward they made tshuva and they become honest about it, and they're saying, yeah, there was really a loan. Did it survive? Did they have to repay it, or was it wiped out in Sheviis? So the Gemara says that the matter is obvious. An originally uncontested loan whose validity was denied at the time of Sheviis is not canceled by Sheviis because the lender could not press for payment. In other words, the lender can't challenge it. He's not allowed to go challenge it and say, no, I did do the loan. Here's proof. Here's evidence. Here's documentation. He's not allowed to go do that. That process of coming and trying to prove that there's a loan is tantamount to pressing for payment. And the Gemara continues, says, on the other hand, a loan whose validity was denied before Sheviis that became claimable during Sheviis is canceled by Sheviis because if not for its cancellation through Sheviis, the lender could have pressed for payment. So let's say you have a loan that was due before the 7th year. He doesn't have a problem to go press for payment. And let's say he just failed to press for payment. Now the Sheviis comes. Now he's going to go press for payment. Or even after Sheviis comes, now he's going to go press for payment. No, it was wiped out. He should have gone and pressed for payment beforehand. And so the Gemara is going to ask, and it says, Rabbi Yirmiyah inquires whether this is so, that a loan whose validity has been denied by the borrower loses the status of a claimable loan regarding monetary law as well. And having established a loan whose validity is denied by the borrower, that it does not have the status of a loan with regards to the prohibition of demanding payment after Sheviis, Rabbi Yirmiyah goes on to inquire whether the law applies elsewhere as well. So the Gemara is going to look into that. So if the person doesn't have the ability to press beforehand, it's not going to be canceled by Sheviis. If he does have the ability to protest beforehand, it is going to be canceled by Sheviis. The Gemara is going to explain. And the Gemara says that this question only arises from the fact that, with regards to Sheviis, an originally uncontested loan whose validity was subsequently denied cannot be collected. And from the ruling that a loan, says Amar Fulda, contested during Sheviis does not become canceled, it can be learned that as long as the debt is contested, it is viewed as if there's no loan in effect, and the loan document is ineffective at extracting payment from the person. So the question arises regarding a loan whose validity is denied that became a claimable loan, does the lender collect the loan from the average properties of the borrower like an ordinary loan? Or would it be like, ordinary loan viewed as having been canceled when it gets contested? And then you basically have it where it's like a new loan that gets created, and the lender can collect only from inferior property. So that doesn't get answered. But the next section of the Mishnah does state that one who lends on collateral does not have his loans canceled. And the Gemara elaborates, and Shmuel says even on a needle. So even if it's on a single piece of collateral like a needle, which is not worth a lot, it's going to still be a lien on something. And then that's not, when you lend on collateral, that's not going to get wiped out by Sheviis. And the Gemara is going to continue, and there's a Brisa which offers biblical sources for the last laws of the Mishnah, which says that the verse states, "But from that which you have with your brothers, you shall relinquish your hand, excluding that which you already have of your brothers under your hand." That's going to be collateral. And furthermore, the verse says, "But from that which you have with your brothers, you shall relinquish your hand," implies, and not one who has hands his notes over to the court for collection. Because at that point, the court is demanding payment, not the lender. This, by the way, is all coming from Beurim 15:3. And if the creditor is holding like a note, well, that's going to be one thing, right? But if now they're handing it over to a court, well, that's not your brother doing it anymore. Now it's the court doing it. And so that's going to be a case where the court is going to go do collections, even, by the way, on Sheviis. The court is allowed for a loan that does not get wiped out during Sheviis in a Prozbul that's going to be handed over to a court. Court's still allowed to go collect on Sheviis itself. And so you have some cases where loans will not be wiped out, and you have cases where if you're making a 10-year loan, implicit in that is you're not making a loan that goes up to the Sheviis. You're making a loan that that there's going to be a Sheviis in there, and you're still making a 10-year loan. So that's going to survive the Sheviis, that loan. And also, if you have people playing games and cheating and saying, I didn't really make a loan, I didn't really borrow the money, things like that. If you are unable to press for payment, your loan is not going to be canceled. If you are able to press for payment and go to a court and prove it, like before the 6th year, then your loan is going to be wiped out because you didn't press for payment. Now, in Halacha 2, we're going to be getting into the Prozbul, and again, in these contested loans, you're talking about what was originally an uncontested loan whose validity gets denied at the time of Sheviis. And this is where the borrower basically denies ever borrowing the money, or he can say that, I repaid the loan, and he brings fake witnesses. The problem is, on Sheviis, you're not allowed to come and press for repayment. And so you can't say anything. So it's like, it looks like you've accepted what the person came and said, but you can't. And so in that case, because you can't defend yourself from that loan is not going to get wiped out. Also, I want to make one final point regarding this case of someone who slaughters a cow, distributes it on Rosh Hashanah. And then we have a question of, is the Rosh Hashanah going to be the first day or the second day? And this question of suffolk. Well, that's only going to be a time where you have testimonies in order to determine it. And there's a Sanhedrin that actually fixes it. So that in today's day, the first day of Rosh Hashanah is always going to count and be final. So you're not going to have a case in today's day where the debt could be wiped out in theory with a Sheviis obligation if you were to borrow money on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, thinking that it would be on the second day. That is going to be, again, something that would have been earlier, because again, you're not sure if there's going to be 30 days in the month before or not, and is the month full or not, because Sanhedrin didn't determine it yet. In the current calendar, this idea of Suffolk and maybe this debt's going to be wiped out, that's not going to be the case today, but it would have been back then. That's why it's in the Gemara. And the other thing I just want to point out is that with Rav talking about the debt having two components of it in Sheviis, one part is going to be where you can't chase for the loan, and the second part is going to be where the loan gets wiped out. The reason that this is in the Gemara, because the Prozbul is coming up, is going to be where, let's say you said, I'm lending money, but I'm waiving the right to pursue. So in other words, somebody can come and chase for money on Sheviis. You might have thought that, maybe in that agreement, this loan survived the Sheviis, and Rav is coming along and saying, no, it doesn't. You have to change the other part, that the loan will survive. That's why you're having the Prozbul. It's not enough just to chase, to take away the part that says, I'm going to take away the rights to chase for the loan. So I just wanted to clarify those 2 points, and we'll get into the Prozbul tomorrow.